just going to start, and that's exactly how we thought we'd facilitate this, is give you each a chance to have the floor, because from years of hearing these stories, it sounds like everybody has their own version of actually how Karen House started. So I thought we could at least get to 3 original versions. We would like to start with Sue. Then it sounds like Mary Ann gets the last word. So we are going to then go to Virginia and then Mary Ann McGivern. So after that, we have lots of time for questions and anything that you'd like to ask them. And so, but in the beginning, we'll start with each one of them. Does that sound all right? Sorry, what?
We'll have multiple choice answers.
Multiple choice answers.
Yes. There's a lot of empty chairs over here.
All right, so Sue Lauritsen, tell us your version of why and how Karen House. That was done for effective purposes. So anything you want to tell us, Sue, it's all you.
I'm going to start, and this is the true version of everything. Anything after that, they embellish. I first got involved with a Catholic worker in Omaha. I was laid up from an accident working as a lineman for the phone company. And there was a parish similar to St. Cronen's. And so I started going down there for 8 o'clock Mass in the morning. And ran into some Catholic worker folks who ran St. Teresa's House, which was a house for transient men. We had a lot of Native Americans, some black, and a lot of Native Americans. And after about 4 or 5 months, I moved in with their community and still kept my job at the phone company. 1976, at some point during that year, probably I would imagine July or August, I'd had ties here in St. Louis, Laura Hilsing, and also some good friends with the Notre Dame community. And so I wanted to come back to St. Louis. And through my involvement with St. Teresa's House, I thought, well, you know, I was 24, not too bright, and I thought, well, you know, St. Louis could really use a Catholic worker house. And my only experience had been with a hospitality house for men, so that's kind of an idea that I had, but I wasn't really wedded to it since I was coming down here for myself. I had contacted some people that had been recommended to me. And some of these are some of the letters. I'm sure there's some from Al Spray, Ann Manganero, Anna Bolin Carter. In fact, I even have one from Dan Berry, but that was on the opening of the house. And I thought, well, okay. So I thought I needed time after I got down here to work on networking and bringing folks together. And I thought, well, how can I do that and work full-time? So I wrote a letter to the Notre Dames and asked them if they would pay my rent for 6 months and my utilities for 6 months. John Lytle, who many of you know, was a diocesan priest at the time, but he was always on the outs with the diocese. And he found me an apartment over on 11th Street, right by Highway 70, and right a couple blocks from Holy Trinity Parish. I think the rent was maybe $50 a month. It wasn't much. So the Notre Dames said yes, that they would do that. And I got a part-time job as a nurse assistant out at their retirement home out in North County. Yeah. And so I thought, I took the letters from the people that said that they were interested in seeing a house, but not necessarily becoming part of the community that would make up that house. So from those names, I got other names, and we started with, probably in January, I started to contact people. now this is January of 77, okay? We didn't have email. Nothing fast. So it was either phone calls for the first meeting, and it was, I'm sorry I didn't keep like an attendance kind of deal of the first meeting and notes and stuff, but I didn't. And then from that meeting, we had those at the apartment. And from that meeting, they involved other people from St. Louis. And the meetings finally grew to large enough where we had them at Notre Dame Convent for St. Alphonsus Rock through the courtesy of Francis Padberg. But now this is in January, so we still talking about what we wanted the house to be, what people's vision was, but still nobody had said yes, I'll start it with. But I really felt that I was more of a conduit than anything. I think the timing was right. The timing, and I think Virginia and Mary Ann will attest to this, that by March, January, February, March, so after maybe 8 meetings, 3 people emerged, and I can't really remember the order, but it was pretty close within the same 2 or 3 week period that Virginia, Luann Schinzel, and Kathy Derby emerged as 3 other women that were interested in building community. And that was like, oh, thank God. And then we continued to meet with a larger group. We didn't just say, okay, there's 4 people here, and we'll go on it. So we did a lot of networking during that time. I worked on finding a place and dealing with the diocese, Monsignor Gallagher. He was just a regular old priest and still an asshole.
Tell us how you really feel, Sue.
They just promoted him into Monsignor. But I dealt with him because, honestly, he knew the property. Well, he was in charge of all the property. And I can't remember exactly who talked about St. Laborious.
John Lytle talked to Marty Mannion.
Right.
And there was an ecumenical institute here, and Marty was not happy with them, and he was willing to end their lease. And I remember meeting with Monsignor Shockley, several of us with Al.
Yeah.
No, weren't you with us?
Yeah. And so St. Laborious and Marty Mannion was here last night. It was great. But
I didn't see him.
Yeah.
he was here, and he was the pastor. The parish was still open, not thriving.
No, he wasn't the pastor.
And it starts.
Yes. Who slept with a gun under his pillow and didn't let blacks come into the
Oh
church.
my God, that's right. That's right.
Which is
Monsignor Ripper.
and it was so miserable that Marty visited all the sick and prayed with all the alcoholics in the street so that he wouldn't have to be at home.
Right. He walked the streets literally. I forgot about Monsignor Ripper.
He said Mass every morning. They would have Mass in the front room of the rectory, and he wore, I kid you not, black vestments and said for the Mass for the dead every day, no matter what.
He got money for it.
That's how it was.
Well, and he may have been dead. We weren't really
I never spoke to them.
So Marty was really an asset. I remember talking to
As opposed to.
As opposed to Monsignor Gallagher.
I remember talking to Gallagher on the phone and referring to Marty Mannion as Marty. Well, needless to say, the next 20 minutes, I got reamed out about how disrespectful I was and So I got off the phone in tears thinking, well, I think that just shot it for St. Laborious, so we won't be having that parish. But we did, and he wanted to charge us, I believe.
Shockley intervened.
Yes, he did.
That's how we got it.
And I believe he wanted to charge us either $900 or $1,000 per month to use and take care of the convent. And Marty said, well, charge him whatever you want. And he said, we'll just take it out of one hand and put it in your hand. But I don't think we ever ended up paying that.
$100.
$300.
It was $100 at first, I think, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure it was 300.
I think it was $300 at first for a little while, but then I think it went down to $100.
Oh, it's still too much.
Yeah. So,
You guys are good.
well, and then eventually they got the convent and the church and took all of everything out of it. So, I mean, you really got a bargain.
Yes. Over a building. Yeah.
So that was real. When I say I really felt like I was a conduit, it was because we would talk. Well, Virginia came to live with me in the apartment
For about 6 weeks.
about 6 weeks. Somebody called and said we should have. It was probably John.
It was Ann and Bola connected with the guy in Cup in St. Louis. What's his name?
Oh.
Bola, maybe?
Yes, I know who he was, but he was very active.
Yeah.
And we have a single woman who's pregnant and very due right away for delivering. Could she come stay with
Her
you?
parents had put her up.
Right. And she literally came to the apartment, went into labor.
She wasn't with us overnight.
She was not with us overnight and never came back to the apartment.
No.
And so,
But that's Karen.
That's Karen.
Okay.
When we had discussions about what we would call the house, and we had already revamped the fact that women and children really needed a place. So when we had the big discussion about what we would call it, we went round and round. I'm sure it lasted much more than one meeting. And then finally, was it you, Virginia, or somebody?
I feel like it was me.
He's here to dispute it. Take it.
All right, yeah. I
I'll take
think it
credit.
was Virginia who finally just said, well, why don't we just name it after the first guest, Karen? And everybody goes, oh, what a great idea. So,
And that
we
was
did.
at Mary Dutcher's house
Yes.
in Benton Park.
Yep.
I remember that.
So that's how Karen came to have a house. And she had been back,
She came back to visit,
yes.
like in the next year or so. I also remember
Did you stay
5
overnight the
women
second
sitting
time?
there still called, no, I don't think she ate either. It was at the hospital. It was still called the father's waiting room, and there were 5 of us sitting in there, 5
Yes.
women in there waiting for her to deliver her baby. And people would walk by.
But it seemed like whenever we talked about what we needed,
That's true. It was spooky.
it was like we would say, well, when we finally got in here and got it cleaned up, we'd say, oh, we really need a refrigerator or something. So somebody would call, honestly, within a week, and have a refrigerator to donate. Because originally, everything in this house was donated. It probably still is, but everything. And one day we were sitting there talking about, we really need a truck.
Oh, I was hoping you would tell us.
We really need a truck so we can pick this stuff up. And it was Virginia and Marilyn Robertson. And I think within a week, we got a 1939,
Kim Fairman.
1930.
wasn't it a 1939 International.
Painted orange.
Orange.
Yeah.
And it was just little, but he couldn't get a license plate for it because he couldn't find a fender. so one of the wheels didn't have a big fender on it. And every time we would go to a house to pick something up, and it was just the 3 women, not just, it was the 3 women that went
Who
to
were
do
more than
it.
adequate to the task.
Yeah. Everything that was donated to us, if I'm not mistaken, was on the 2nd floor. And it was like, in fact, one lady donated a chest freezer, and honest to God, we think that they built the basement around it.
It's in the basement.
And we tried.
Oh, so there was
It was
Heaviest.
the heaviest thing
We
we've
never
ever-
did get out.
No, we got it.
Oh, I'll tell you.
We got it.
One of these bookcases.
Oh.
Do you remember that?
My God. But everything was so heavy and so like,
But you haven't told them about the truck.
I know. So we get the truck loaded, but we'd always have to park it on a hill.
If there was a hill.
If there was a hill. Otherwise, we'd back it in. Because we always had to push it by hand to get it started, to pop the clutch, because it wouldn't start unless we pushed it. And then we'd stop at a stoplight, and the clutch would stick. So whoever wasn't driving
I
had to
remember
get
Marilyn
out.
and I being the
I've
team.
never heard this story.
And to
by the
get
way,
out,
no, Marilyn
lift the
would never.
hood, and
I'd
unstick
lift the hood,
the
Marilyn
clutch.
would reach in and shift the clutch.
And we'd go again. And we really used that truck quite a lot.
Sounds like it used you.
It was marvelous.
Whoever gave it to us really must
I
not
think
have
it
liked
was
us.
Kim Fairman,
Maybe.
a friend of mine from, I don't remember now just where, but he built the wooden cabinet doors that were under the sink until just recently, and he built the door between the chapel and the community room.
And it
Kim
had a
Fairman's
license
lawn.
plate on it from God knows what year.
And we never got stopped.
I think
They heard we couldn't start again.
And then I remember Luann going to, because during this time, while we were working on this, we were also networking with really anybody that would listen to us. School, because it was before school started, or got out.
Well, we moved in June
Right.
and did all this hauling over the summer.
And did lots of. I know we were at Humphreys one night, and Luann had just come from talking at a high school, and she said, "I've got some really good news for you." So we're at Humphreys and we were having a beer or something, and she took out a check. She said she had given a talk, and the teacher came up to her afterwards.
Oh, jeez. Marty Mannion!
Everybody doesn't know Marty Mannion is the original dumpster
And
He's the original dumpster diver. Marty Mannion still goes along the street and picks up anything he finds.
Yes, he does.
And brings it to us.
Come in.
You gotta make an appearance anyway.
So
Surreal. This place
Luann
is
took a
surreal.
check. She didn't open it in front of the woman. It was in an envelope. She got in the car. She opened the check and she goes, "Oh my God!" It was a check for $10,000. Yeah. How could you forget it? That's how we opened
In
it.
those days, $10,000 is like $1 million.
Oh yeah.
Well,
for
our
us.
first gift was our very first gift was a $5 check from Luann's housemate. Sister, what's her name?
Nancy.
Nancy.
Sister, what's her name?
Nancy something. Yeah, but it was a check for $10,000. The woman was married to a psychiatrist, and I can't remember. Julie? I can't remember his name. But anyway, so we had a little bit of a cushion.
It wasn't Carl Worley.
Yes.
Julian and Carl Worley.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
in choir with Julie when I was young.
It was. Yes.
We'll have to thank him all over again.
Yeah. And tell him to write another one. So it was like, we knew we needed money, and then she comes home with a $10,000 check. So everything just kind of came into place. And we decided to open in September, and the concern was, how are we going to get the news out, that we're open for hospitality? And I said, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. And within I would say just a very few weeks, we were full. And our very first Christmas in December, we had 60 guests. 60. 12 of those guests were under 2 years old.
I remember being in the office and they all came in and it was like being in Lilliput land. There were all these little people.
And we, after that Christmas, and we could kind of debrief, we said we will never do that again because we were almost dead.
And the plumbing couldn't do it.
No. But that's really all I have.
Bravo!
All right, Virginia.
Well, I got connected to the workers because I was living on Botanical with a woman I had been a telephone operator with named Beverly. And Beverly is like my friend. Is that how you say it? She introduced me to Thomas Merton, the Catholic worker, feminism, Zen Buddhism, political activism. This woman was like, and she is now a contemplative nun in Connecticut. She was always the firebrand activist. I was always, not doing much. But it's like we flipped roles. So Beverly should really be here. But she went to high school at the Sales when John Logan was down there, and they became friends because they were both. But Chucky, you know. So one night, we went down in August, remember? A few months came down every night to the hotel out on Acre and invited people out for a meeting.
Right.
And John and Beverly were going, and they invited me, and I said, these two are always a stick to be with. So sure, I'll go. And I remember Mary Beth Gallagher was there. And I don't remember too much what we did at the meeting, but that happened. And then when you came down in January, I started going to regular meetings, which were always big and had a wonderful spirit. And my memory is that by the end of January, Kathy and there was a meeting, and I think like you asked, is anyone ready to commit to living in a house? And my memory is that like all three of us pretty much. And I remember looking and going, oh wow, it's not just me, And then we started meeting weekly, the four of us, and we always had sort of an emphasis on prayer being the basis of what we did, and that was real strong through the first years. And I have to always give credit that having nuns in the community from the beginning. Luann was a Franciscan, and then we had Marianne and Ann before the house opened. And their experience of commitment and formation in community and all of that, I think, really created the framework for us to be, I think so. And I want to read, this is our first newsletter. And I think it was the four of us. I remember the four of us putting this together at Kathy Derby's house out at Bethesda. That might be wrong, but that's my memory of it. And this is what we said were sort of our goals. It says, we hope to develop an atmosphere of prayer so that our actions will be a reflection of the radical gospel message, to share a sense of joy in life with others, to develop an affirming atmosphere for each individual, to strive to build a community that provides an alternative to present-day capitalistic system, to challenge one another to respond justly to ourselves and all creation through nonviolence, the works of mercy, voluntary poverty, and simplicity.
So you were Marxists.
From the get.
Anarchists.
And I have to say, I feel that I failed more often than I succeeded. And maybe even we continue to fail more often than we succeed. But I still really like this. And I still think it's worth failing at, So then I remember the brouhaha with Gallagher and Shockley getting it straightened out. And then the four of us went to New York and visited the New York Catholic Worker in early June. And then came back, and it seems like pretty quickly moved into the house. And we spent the first night in the room that's right off, the first one, like what was you and Jenny's room? I don't know how to describe it, on the third floor. And there was still a functioning truck yard right across the road here. And, 4 o'clock in the morning, the screeching and booming and everything started. I remember I had no idea what the noise was, but it was the truck's brakes and gears and starting up and all that. And along that road, I free associate, so along that road there was a garage, like a 2-story big commercial garage that was called Ecological Consultants Limited. An old man sat in front of it.
That's 1818, right?
I guess. And it eventually literally fell down in the middle of the night. And next to that was a little house that had literally a red light in the second story window when we moved in. And next to that was a little woman who kept a garden, sweet little woman, and she helped Claire with gardening. We got to know Mr. Perry down the street on Hogan, Grandma and Grandpa Perry, and their family is still there, like their grandchildren still live there. And Burke's Chapel was across the street. It was the funeral home for the parish, which had been turned into Burke's Chapel, and Burke was like a big black Buddha.
Who was a notary public.
Yes. And what?
He was a notary. That's the
And he told me that, well, anyhow, this goes on. So we lived up there, and Genevieve and Laura Hilsing and maybe another Notre Dame sister,
I know two of us. I don't remember.
maybe only two, came in and helped clean the house all summer long, and it has never been cleaner.
I'd like to have a little part in this story,
Go.
but you
Go.
ahead, Mary Ann and Al. And
And I remember I learned something important for me. First of all, I learned
How to clean.
how they clean. I never took it on, but I was awed. Did you know you can clean the space between your window and the screen?
Just open it up.
Never occurred to me. But I also remember one evening after dinner, Genevieve was sitting out here reading a book. I think it might have been DeSales. What's his book? Anyhow,
The sales, I don't
something. Anyhow, some book. And I thought, oh, you can stop. You can work and then you can stop. Now, I didn't really learn to do that for a long time. And so what you do is work stupid when you just keep working and you're not thinking and you're not really resting. So I worked stupid for years, but it was a real insight that later I
Thank you.
grabbed
Maybe I
onto.
could jump
Go.
in here. We have a history before this history, that is to say, School Sisters
Yeah.
of Notre Dame. In 1847, Mother Caroline came to, Mother Teresa brought 4 sisters, and Sister Caroline was one of them. Mother Teresa left about 2 years, left this young 23-year-old and said, open schools in the wilderness. In the wilderness, that's right. So Buffalo all the way down to New Orleans, and this was St. Liborius. We were at St. Joseph's on Biddle Street, St. Peter and Paul, and I think this was the 3rd. And she came here, and, we were here teaching in the school till 1960, either 5 or 8. 1965 or 8. And so we, I didn't know how much we were part of it with you, Sue.
Oh, yeah.
In that, but we always really, it's a special place in our hearts. And just recently, in one of our newsletters, it was written up again about St. Liborius and then the Karen House story. So my little part in this was I was doing a lot of spiritual direction and retreats, and that can get very, tunnel-y kind of. So I thought, they're going to open that Karen House. I mean, they're going to open that Catholic worker. We'll go there. I'll go there and I'll spend a couple weeks and, sleeping on the floor, little creatures crawling over me, cleaning. And we didn't have a refrigerator. I remember Kathy Derby would cook pots of something. We must have had a stove. They were like big pots of stuff. And then we didn't have a refrigerator, so she'd stick it on the bookshelf. She'd put the pot on the bookshelf. The next day, she'd heat that stuff up again. And, oh, my God. It went on like that. Do you remember that?
We also went over and cooked at the rectory kitchen sometimes.
We probably did. Oh, my
Now,
goodness.
Kathy's not here to defend herself.
No. I mean, she was only doing... She did it.
She
was
cooked.
wonderful.
Hey, no one else cooked.
She cooked. So, yes, I do remember coming out here and thinking a garden. I mean, that was always part of our history as School Sisters of Notre Dame, our foundress. Whenever she opened a convent, she'd always tell the pastor, and the sisters must have a garden. A garden. And there was this place where I could come and be refreshed.
And work.
So, anyway, that's...
You were reminding me of something else I remembered about that summer. Well, anyhow, over the course of the summer, I remember meeting with you and Mary Ann and Petey at your place on Waterman, and you decided you all were going to move over. And the Helpers of the Holy Souls referred Marilyn to us. They knew her somehow, and she came, I think, in the course of the summer. And I don't remember where Joanne Silva came from, and she left before Christmas.
She was a friend of Luann's.
So I found some pictures, and I actually have a picture of all of us that I don't know if I've seen it anyplace else. And here's a
Probably not.
so here's another story of that summer. We would periodically have all-day meetings. I remember bringing stuff in forever, and these people cleaning forever, and thinking this house is never going to be together. And I think we pretty much decided we may as well just open, because we're never going to get it really together. But anyway, we went away to an all-day meeting. I don't know where, maybe at the White House, and decided when we were going to open, September 26th. And we came home. Mary Ann got home before us, and we walked in, and she said, "I just accepted some guests."
I think that's my cue.
No, but let me tell you, it was Dean and Connie Sue.
You get an A.
And Dean stayed at Cass House later for a long time. Connie Sue. He was one of the sweetest,
Yes.
most damaged men. He said that the military ran tests on him and destroyed him.
He was in Vietnam.
And he was in Vietnam. But he was not married to Connie Sue. He found them in a park and had this need to take care of them, and they told us they were married so they could stay with us. He was just so sweet. But anyhow, he watched us fumbling around, and the first office was in the room that's now the quiet room. And the desk that was the office desk for forever was here when we moved in. And we had bedrooms on the first floor. That's how we got. My memory is at one point 72 people living in the house, so maybe it was 69 guests in the community.
Yeah, right.
And so what is now the office was a bedroom for a couple. And the floor needed to be redone. And Dean said, I could refinish that. I could sand that floor for you. And we were saying, God, do you think he knows what he's doing or what? And Mary Ann said...
Like we did.
Yeah, right, yeah. So Mary Ann said, I think we should let him do it. And if he messes it up, we will just always lovingly refer to it as Dean's floor. And he did a great job.
Fine.
Yeah. So Mary Ann, I'm thinking you'll recognize this. This is part of my show and tell. Do you? Well, I'm glad you gave it to me then. When Mary Ann left the little house, she gave me this and said Dean had given it to her.
Oh, my.
And I keep it because it's from Dean. So I was very happy about that. And then, it becomes a blur. I remember we had some guests, and some shelter was closing down for a while, and we took in like 7 women and their children, and it was the 2 Native American women, and I think that might be when Phyllis came, and, it really was a blur. But I have these photos, some of which are from those very early times. See, there's Luann. Eleanor Barkeye was one of the earlier guests. There's Helen and her kids. And Gloria and Cento. The sweetest mother and child you could ever know. And that child is now 37. 35 years
Some
ago.
of these are also Cass House pieces.
And
I
then
looked at
these, Cass House is kind of getting short shrift, but when I went to Nicaragua, Kathy Barton made this for me of people at Cass House. And it's wonderful photographs of the people that were there. Stanley.
Does it that way?
Oh, that's right. Stanley Hackney, for example, has to be mentioned.
Yes.
Hackney? Yes.
And
Emmett has to be mentioned. He was a trooper at Cass House.
but Stanley's one of the community members who died that we didn't email you.
Did I not send it to you?
that.
I don't remember, but we're going to open it up. So
Stanley gave me some of the best advice I've ever gotten. I love that man. He said, smile and look a little stupid, honey. They'll go away. It works. It really works.
thank you, Virginia.
That's it.
All right, so we're going to do Mary Ann, and then anyone else that has anything to add to Karen House and ask questions. And then I was thinking, as we're here, at some point it would be awesome, since we have Janet and Barb and Tim and Emmett, that we can, if anybody wants to tell how Cass House came into the picture, that would be awesome as well.
I had one small thing. I want to say that my memory is that it was Sue who had the insight that we should be a place for women and children, and I don't know if any of the rest of us are paying enough attention to have that idea. So I think you should take full credit for that.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Sue. All right, Mary Ann.
Well, there wasn't a place for women and children.
No.
There wasn't anything.
There was a need.
They started after us.
Wow.
I'm almost positive.
Yeah, I think we were the first.
Ann and Petey and I had joined with an abused women's group, and we're taking women in. So over that year before, we would have occasionally a woman who was abused, fleeing her husband, maybe we had 5 women in the course of a year. I left in Thanksgiving, November of '76, just when Sue was starting to organize things to come here. I took a sabbatical from the Peace Institute and went down to Florida and worked with the farm workers. So I wasn't here for any of all those meetings. I didn't go to any of them. And I was really thinking, did I want to work for the union? But I just really longed for community, which is its own funny long story. So I came back, and Anna and Paulette had decided to go to graduate school in New York, Petey, and Ann had decided to go to Forest Park and get the biology and organic chemistry classes that she needed in order to apply for medical school. And Ann and I had decided we would live together. And so I came back, and we were living on Pershing, and it was June, and I was back at work at the Peace Institute. And one morning, we were having breakfast, and Ann said, "I had a dream last night." Now, I told this story, and I would always get there, and I would say it was about teaching school. And Ann would say, "No, it wasn't. It was about," and she would describe the dream. And I heard it. I heard what she said, and I thought, yes, it was about teaching school. But it was a big deal. I think it was really for her a dream about transformation. But she said, I want to live at the Catholic Worker, and I know that I said that I would live with you. What would you think about moving into the Worker? And I said, well, I really miss the farm workers. I liked it a lot. I liked being with people who were poor and struggling and committed to big visions. I said, I hadn't been to the New York Worker. I hadn't ever paid much attention to the Worker. But I said, why not? So that afternoon, it must have been a Sunday. And it was probably when you were all visiting the Worker, because nobody was here, and we drove down, and Pruitt-Igoe had just been imploded. And we drove along Del Mar and came on to, must have been Martin Luther King. No, Martin Luther King, and it turned on to Cass. And it was the ugliest drive. And we were talking, and we got here, and we drove around, and we looked at it, and we parked, and we looked at this building, and we went home in silence. We didn't say anything. But then we came to a meeting, and we said we were really interested. So then we were in, and we did not move in right away. We didn't move in, I don't think, until August, when Paulette left to go to graduate school, and our lease was up, and so we missed some of the most exciting parts with the orange truck, but there you are. So then. Where we had that retreat was at Armbruster's, and there was a giddiness about. I don't think it was that time. I think it was a calc day at Armbruster's, but it might have been this day when we got there early, and we went skinny dipping in that pool,
in that lake, yeah,
in that little pond, and well, it was. It was this excitement that was going on, but at the same, so there was that tone to it. Giddy is really the right word for it. I think that we were biting off way more than we could chew, and we had no idea how it was going to come out. But
didn't even know we were biting off more.
No, we had no notion.
We were young and dumb.
Only way to do it.
Right. Never. And so we decided that day. It was Labor Day weekend, that we would open the house in 3 weeks at the end of September. Which is why we always end up having this party now, because that was the official decision. But Ann, see, nobody ever dumped on Ann, ever. Ann had to had to start school, and so she wanted to get back early. And I said I'd drive. Somebody had to drive with her because we didn't have enough cars if she just took one by herself. So I came back early, and I did answer the phone. And it was a priest.
First mistake.
Right. It was a priest from East St. Louis, and he said, and he was, I've forgotten his name, but he had been very generous to us. And he said, I have a little family that was sleeping in the park. Can you take them? And I said, just a minute. And I went and talked with Ann. I consulted. I honestly did.
Good for you.
And she said, well, and so we said yes. We said yes, and so we took him. So that was Dean and Connie Sue, and Dean was inarticulate, almost. I mean, he would say, it came like, a flash. And then those butterflies, he was talking about sending carrier pigeons with peace messages tied to their legs that would drop. But it took 15 minutes to understand that this was his idea about how to spread word. But he was there for a long time. I saw him on the highway years and years later and pulled over and stopped and said, how are you and what are you doing? And come and visit. And he went immediate. I was on my way someplace else, and I came back to the little house, and he had come and gone. And but he'd come in and fix a peanut butter sandwich and give half to the first dog, Fleetwood. I have just a couple of other things that I wanted to say that were I answered the phone before we opened, and it was Mary Rock, Sister Mary Rock Rockledge. And she was then the president just of St. John's Mercy, not of the whole system. And she said, what do you need? How can I help? And I said, oh, gee, I don't know. Exactly. I was thinking, wait, how do you, and what, and she said, well, have you thought about how you're going to do the laundry?
Yeah, we've been doing
and
that.
I said,
at Notre Dame Hall, right?
That's
I said, oh my gosh. But of course we had no guests yet. This was before we had guests, so we didn't.
Well, I mean, maybe that call was, but we did laundry for a while at Notre Dame Hall after we had guests, because I did it with Phyllis, but anyhow.
Yeah, blankets and...
Yeah.
Well, blankets and things, yes, but because this was the linen.
Yeah.
So she said, well, come and pick up a load of sheets and towels of linen, and we'll give you 2 sets to start, and when the first set is dirty, bring them back and we'll launder them and give you another replacement set. We still do that?
Oh, isn't that marvelous?
That's how that began.
They don't even have their own laundry anymore at the hospital, and they still do it.
And they
They don't know.
and then when we decided that our best bet for the guests' laundry would be to get the coin-operated machines. And many of you probably know that the company periodically asks us, don't we want to install $2 coins instead of 25 cent? And we say, no, we're paying it anyway. But that was, so there was that. And then...
And let me just add,
okay, go ahead.
Sister Mary Rock would send down a big sheet cake for St. Joseph the Worker Day for our anniversary, or she would just send the most beautiful surprises and gifts for years. She was so good to us.
Well, so the last thing maybe that I'll tell, the actual early decision was that we would be a home for families. That it wasn't just women and children, that we were not going to be one more institution that separated families. And so in that first 8-10 months, we had one couple where the man went out at night and drank or gambled or whatever, and the woman let him in the window of the house. We had one man who had an affair with another woman in the house. We had one man who sat around all day and just loved it, being around in the house. We had a woman
Charles and Sandra.
we had a woman with a 16 or 17-year-old boy, and some of the women in the house, the younger moms, set their cap for him, as it were, and it was really difficult. And then finally, we accepted a family. I have a feeling, I don't know who sent them to us. They were from Kentucky, driving west looking for work, and their car had broken down. They had 3 children, and one of the children was pretty severely disabled and really, really bedridden and not able to do much. And I know which room it was, on the second floor on the street side of that was their bedroom, and they asked if we didn't have a TV, and they asked if they could have a TV in the room for her because it gave her something to focus on. And the man went out every day, worked, did day labor, came home, reported, shared the money. The woman was one of those wonderful guests who pitches in, cooks, does the dishes, mops the floor, sees what needs to be done, and does it, and was just always participating. And the other women in the house were mean to her. They never gave her any slack. They never took her job. They never helped her to get the little girl out or outside or down the stairs. They were telling on her or saying, they can have a TV, why can't we? And it must have been 2 of us, maybe Ann and I one day said to a couple of these other women, why are you she's a good woman with a hard life. And they said, yeah, she's got a hard life. I'm sorry that she's got a baby who's sick and who can't do anything. But, she has a steady, faithful husband. She's got 3 kids. They're going to make it, and they don't need anything from us. And we talked about it. We brought it back to the community. We talked about what it meant for the women to see that kind of disparity, and what it meant. And we looked at all these other cases we'd had of accepting men in the house, and we decided we couldn't do it. That was the end. That we would not accept any more, even anyone older than 12-year-old boys. That was the. So that's one more bit.
I think before we open it up for questions, I would love it if some of the Cast House folks would chime in and just give.
Maybe they could sit up here.
No.
Better.
Can the cameras get to them?
Sue. Sure, the cameras move.
Hi, Maureen.
Maureen, Emmett, Timbo, Sue.
Would anyone particularly like to start that?
Barb is the earliest netcaster.
Well, actually, Maureen.
A lot earlier than me,
Actually,
anyway.
Sue.
Yeah, Maureen and Sue, talk about how you made that decision.
Oh, God.
And I know that wasn't
I'd
easy
rather not
because
relive that.
We were.
It was very.
Things were painful.
We worked, and we worked, and we worked, and we worked, and we rebuilt the house, and we.
Yeah.
It took 6 months before we finally got it open?
I think at least. And it took almost a year to make the decision to open it, with the Karen House community, because originally Luann and I were thinking that the Vincentian priests, it was their provincial house.
That's right.
And so there was a few priests there. Hugh O'Donnell.
Hugh O'Donnell. He lived there while he was provincial.
Frank Harden. And it was becoming available, and they were willing to give it to us. well, any of you that had ever experienced Cass House, it was huge. It was 55,000 square feet. Its own chapel, its own everything.
Its own church.
So originally, Luann and I thought about taking Karen House and moving it down there, and then having a section for men, you know, that was separate, so we could still do the women and families. And the hardest part of the decision was the smallness of Karen House, you know, compared to Cass House, and I think the intimacy of what that brought. So after months, really months, of trying to reach some kind of consensus, the consensus was that we would share finances and run the houses autonomously, separately, and that was the best we could come up with. But I do think that whole decision, it really took its toll on some respects. And with hindsight, you know, I wish that I had been older and more mature and in making that decision. Cass House, you know, we had great people that lived there, but it was huge.
Thank you.
Barb.
Yeah. Janet, Emmett. Chris.
But it was big, and it did take a lot of time, and it did take a lot of energy. And it stayed open for 8 years, and, you know, much to the credit of people like Barb and Phil Donahue and Zach. Monica.
Stanley.
Audrey. Maureen was there longer than I was.
And Phyllis.
Yeah.
What year did it open?
And what year did it open?
80?
I think
80.
Was
You
it?
opened the fall of '79.
Yeah,
I
you
graduated
were.
in
2 years,
'79
yeah.
Is that
from
what it
college
is?
and came back
I stayed
to
there
be.
in October of '79.
Right.
First
Yeah.
week of October '79.
And honestly, the most
Because we only liked working on the house, doing grunt work in the heat of St. Louis summer.
Oh, sure. I mean, why
but
do it any
actually,
other?
you know, because the Vincentians were living there, they were only living in part of the house.
Oh, I forgot that.
It wasn't
Cute.
in
Provincial
and
Yeah, I
I
forgot that they coincided. And the
Jewel
bishop
Donald
came
was
through.
provincial. And I contacted him, I don't know, I'm sure it's been a few years ago now. He was in China. And I emailed him. And he, to that day, said that was the best experience of his life.
Yes, yes.
Because he lived with us crazy people. Phyllis and her 6 kids.
Oh, were they all with you?
4 kids. Phyllis and her 4
Seemed like
kids.
6.
And she had sent up.
And just some of there were I don't know, six priests there maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
6, 7.
Some of the priests did not like living in a co-ed environment. Hugh O'Donnell and a couple of them absolutely loved it. They would come down and have coffee. Now they had their separate living quarters, of course, but oftentimes Phyllis or one of us would go up and watch sports with them or sit in their community room, you know, and stuff. I think one of the priests had to leave because he just really couldn't take it. But they were there. I mean, they were there for months, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. A year.
Yeah.
And they helped out in soup kitchen.
Oh, yeah.
They were serious about
Yeah.
They were great because they were waiting for their building to be renovated over on
That's right.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yes, right by
Yes.
Immaculate Conception.
Right.
So, let you all talk about
Well, I remember Cass House, at that point it was the Vincentian Foreign Missionary Office. So they had huge printing presses. They had taken this beautiful mansion, but there was the chapel area and they had huge printing presses.
The
over
Great
there.
Press had been there.
Yeah.
Not LaGuardia.
Yeah.
Not Vincentian Press.
No, not
LaGuardia.
Vincentian
Press. Right.
You know, and the basement was full of little banks. You remember?
The basement was great.
Yeah, it was great. So we spent a lot of time just getting that space ready for, it was going to be hospitality for men, and that was what you first opened in 79, was hospitality for men on one side of the house. Well, we worked on the other side of the house, which had been classrooms and such, you know, on the second floor. So we ended up having two separate dining rooms. In the men's section, two separate entrances, so where families could stay together in the same space and get to stay or have dinner together. But it did provide a place where we could provide hospitality. And Sue, I think that probably strained resources too, because we had to staff, you know, two areas, because we always had at least one or two people staying in the men's section overnight, and then you had to have somebody in the women's section too. So that pulled a lot of time. We were fastidious about the beautiful wood floors, so we were always cleaning. But I do remember being called on that by one guest who said, "You all are busy just running around taking care of things and you don't even notice us." So I remember Gloria calling us, you know, because we would meet with guests periodically and just say, you know, you've been here a couple weeks. What's your plan? What are we doing? You know, because remember we're temporary shelter, so we'd always kind of check in with them. And I remember her reminding us that leave the cleaning and the floor and all the other, pay attention to us. So that was a good one. But in general, we were gifted with a lot of people coming in. We had a lot of fun. 905 beer and government
cheese.
Government subsidized cheese and cans of unsalted peanuts. We lived on that for
Cans of pork.
6 months, 12 months.
And the donuts?
And Dale donuts.
And the egg run from Ann and Paul Park, remember? They wanted the guests to have real eggs. They were remembering Depression era, recycling the coffee from the convent for the soup kitchen during the Depression. And they said, no powdered eggs, 1 day a week, real eggs.
And they had
took it out of their
fused.
Social Security
Ann
meager
and
check.
Paul.
They sent us eggs, or that we had to go pick them up.
And the folks at Fuse, the Jesuit scholastic residents, would order extra eggs on flats, and we'd go pick them up.
Maureen would set out things for dinner because you were the first person kind of in charge of the kitchen and all of the volunteers. And before your workday, you would set everything out, and then you'd race out of the house, and then come back and volunteers. And I still remember the night we served garbanzo bean casserole. Yes. And A, there was no meat there, and B, people were looking at it like, I am not that hungry.
Phyllis was, I love that. Phyllis would help every day. She was,
chain smoking Phyllis, who just,
and they moved to Denver.
Yeah, they did move to Denver.
I did too.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was in charge of all the work in one of the big hotels here. She was so good. Wow. Kids were good. Yeah.
She was a hard worker.
Yes.
Yes, smart.
Emmett or Tim?
I didn't get there till 83, so the Vincentians were long gone. I didn't see any priests around there. And,
Except when we needed money or repairs.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I did meet Frank once and Hugh once, I think. But I was volunteering between like Christmas break, summer break. I was going to law school at Vanderbilt at the time. And I had worked at Simon Community in Ireland and started reading about the Catholic worker. And but I really came here first, and my first memory is trying to have a conversation with Virginia while she ran around Karen House. I was kind of behind her, and then every 6 feet she'd bend over to pick something up, or I always remember scooping up or wiping up some vomit. That was my first real memory of Catholic worker, but
Sold you, didn't it?
It's a metaphor.
I did.
I get that
Clean
beat.
it up.
I still wasn't just stepping over it and going.
So Cass House was sort of like the AAA farm club, if I can use a baseball analogy for Karen House, because the Karen House community was full, and of course, they weren't really sure whether this county kid could hack living in community with the Karen House folks. So, I guess the line was shorter over at Cass House.
It took anyone.
And you just needed so many people, but to keep the thing running. So I think that Cass House, you might call it an elegant failure, but I'm sure glad that Sue and Maureen and the Karen House community at the time decided to take that leap, because it just adds a valuable stripe to the history of that Clemens house over there, which may be saved or may not be saved. Wow, it was a full throttle Catholic worker house of hospitality for 35 women and children and 15 men for 7-8 years, and it's pretty impressive. Soup kitchen, food pantry, clothing room.
And some doctors for a little while too.
Doctor.
And did hospitality to a hermit.
That's right.
Have to give him credit.
Refugee to LSA.
Here's to failure.
Yeah.
Right.
For LSAO and his family. is
When
still
no one
here.
would take it in.
LSAO and his family and 4 kids.
Right. So the refugee to the hermit, did you talk about that already?
No.
No, tell her.
Well, it was it?
Are you talking about LSA?
No, no, that's refugee. The hermit.
It's Virginia.
Virginia. Okay. You were the. Okay. All right.
The hermit at Cass House.
She was very quiet. Yeah, you
I
didn't
was
see
so
her.
quiet. Yeah, I just.
She lived back behind the chapel in that
Okay. I
sanctuary.
forgot who it was that lived back there.
That was
As a true solitary would do.
I think I'm the only person that lived in all 3 houses.
Yeah.
Right. So I
One
guess-
time at Christmas, we made hermit cookies. And we were there with Sharon and BJ. Yeah, we all sat and they all thought it was hysterically funny that you were there with us eating hermit cookies.
Virginia, how long were you
get-
there? 4 years.
It overlapped with the time I was there, so Virginia and I didn't become friends until after I moved to Chicago, because she really wasn't speaking much. It was not really possible to get to know her very well.
It was easy to make decisions with her.
It was much easier.
But I think the great thing here that's coming out is that Cass House was so expansive, and there were so many nooks and crannies and different types of space that we had. We had a refugee family. We had, Dean. Is Dean here?
No.
Okay. So Dean was. I think you alluded to it, Mary Ann. He had
Shell shock.
Yeah, he had shell shock. So he lived in this sort of crazy part of the house. That was just kind of, you had to go over the river and through the woods to even get to it, and it was like you wouldn't even know it was there. So he lived there, and then we had couples living, married couples living. We had all types
Bobby
of
and
people.
her family.
Bobby and her family.
We could run any kind of experiment we wanted, because how could you say no if somebody said, hey, I want to do something, and we've got 3,000 square feet to do it with? How can you say no?
And Bill, we had volunteers that stayed during tax.
Oh, we had many,
Well,
the Slickwater.
Yeah, well, the Slickwater meetings, but she's speaking of the National Vortex, was just
Yes.
was coordinating committee.
Yes, that's right.
Actually, in '82, held its first meeting at Cass. Well, they stayed at Cass House.
Well, the meetings were at Cass House.
And the meetings were at Cass House.
Absolutely.
Oh, and we were able to, so failed, it's, an elegant failure maybe, but we were able to open our doors for all sorts of
say
community,
yes.
forms
We could
of
say
community.
yes.
We could say yes.
I didn't know that.
Parenthesis, the Economic Conversion Project's first office was in the 2 front
Right
rooms
here.
of Karen House.
But James McDonald, the founder of McDonald, came in a Cadillac to Cass House, and we had a meeting with him. It was a shareholder challenge at a beautiful table down on that first floor. It was other management, I think, was there from McDonnell Douglas, and then sister. Were you a part of that, Jen? Would you have been a part of that?
Susan Jordan.
Aggie,
Susan Jordan. We used to drop
Susan
her off.
And Aggie
here when I
Harmon
lived at
would have been
Maria.
there.
Yeah, we
And,
dropped her off here because the offices were here.
Yeah,
Susan, Marianne, and I worked in those front
yeah,
rooms.
Right.
and Mary Dutcher for a while.
And so, what did McDonald have to say?
Well, he
This is Bobby.
talked about all the divisions of McDonnell Douglas as if they were his children. And he said that his goal was to have it 50% commercial and 50% military.
A goal.
I'm wondering if maybe we could try to open it up
Yeah.
to some questions
Yeah.
now, and anybody that you
Other
want to direct them
experiences.
to specifically or in general, please.
And just other people's stories, please.
Jenny Truex.
Some other Catholic workers that I've seen, sometimes the influence of women and men religious lends itself to more structure within the Catholic order community that's formed. Maybe that would look like, it's more of a staff position, maybe, it's more hierarchical, less consensus and things like that. So I'm kind of curious about how you made Karen House so sort of organic with these structures that are very much just based on volunteers and precarity, as opposed to directors and staff positions.
It never was that.
No, we were absolutely clear it was consensus from the beginning. I guess did you come with that as a notion, Sue?
I didn't even know what consensus meant.
I think it was
I learned very quickly.
I think Luann probably had a lot of
Yeah.
that. I certainly didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the
Yeah.
Catholic worker was until I went to that first meeting. But I think Luann, and there was the movement for a new society at that point, or
right.
something that was kind of a
Yeah.
way that a lot of movement
Yeah.
things were done
Is that the
at the
monster
time.
manual? Because I remember early
Yes,
on.
there was a manual
Yes.
that they created out of the
Right.
Philadelphia Light
Resource
Center.
manual
Right.
for a living revolution.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
So we had a foot in the religious and in the.
But and Anne was certainly committed to consensus, so I think as she began to come to meetings and things, she would have stressed that too.
Anybody else?
I just want to say to add to Cass House, it's my memory that the first announcement of sanctuary and the first
Oh, yeah?
refugees was held in one of the front living rooms there.
Could be.
When I was looking through this, Sister Jerry Finan,
Oh, I just talked to her.
really?
2
She's
days
the
ago.
one that gave me John Lytle's
Is that right?
information. And I don't know how I got her information to begin with, but she was helpers of the
Holy Souls,
Yeah.
North Side.
and lived in St. Anne's Parish.
Yes.
That's the one part
Yes.
community.
Yes.
But that's how I
yes.
got John's information.
Very open.
And,
Love it.
contacted him and Al Sprague.
Most of us had jobs, or Anne was in school full time. And we didn't have any money to pay a salary to anybody, and so we had very practically we had to figure out a way that would work to share decision making. Oh, I do remember one. We had made a decision finally that we would not accept anybody into the house if they had been drinking. We
Except
simply
Hazel.
would not.
Hazel was grandfathered
that's
in.
her own. No, we said no to anybody. And I was the lightest sleeper, and often heard the door in the middle of the night. And the next night, we had just made this decision, and it was pouring rain. And there was this guy drunk, and the police had a total stranger, guy who was drunk, and the police car was sitting there. They had dropped him off, and it was soaking wet and stinking with alcohol. And I let him in and let him sleep on the couch in the front room, and said, "We have to talk about the decision." It was like when I learned what consensus meant, that we had made a decision and Sue, you were so angry with me. I was really. God damn it, we made this decision. We spent 2 full meetings trying to decide this. I will not revisit it.
I was immature.
Well, you were. It wasn't an unreasonable reaction, but it was. I realized I couldn't do it.
When you were talking, it reminded me of another thing about community. We were always clear that community was necessary for the work, and it was so that was always a strong emphasis to us. And when we had some people with jobs and some not, we decided that all of the money went in one pot. I believe all of it did. And it covered, we did some tithing for charity and tithing for justice out of that. And then we covered some community expenses, and everyone got $20 a month for whatever. And I learned the mentality of the poor. Because you got that $20, you knew that $20 was not going to last a month no matter what you did. So we would go out and blow it and get the most fun out of it we could. I remember, who was it? Someone and I took our lawyer from a civil disobedience action out to eat, and he was like, "You can't take me out to eat." We said, "Hey, we got our $20. It's time to go blow it, you know?" I have ever since understood people who are not responsible with the little bit they've got, because that's the best decision to make with it. It really is.
So you did full economic sharing?
Yeah.
How long did that last?
As long
Not
as I was
very
here.
long.
Oh, did it?
Oh, that works.
Yeah,
As long as I was here.
81, $20.
I'm sorry, how long? But fairly early on, though, we just put money into the pot.
Well, that's true. By the
Yeah.
time Pat and
When
Mark
I
were
came
here.
in '83, it was people made a choice. They took part in the full economic sharing and got the. But it wasn't $20 at that point. You said how much you needed. I think it was 50 actually, and then there were others who weren't fully part of it, but just contributed monthly from their salary, but didn't ever take.
Right.
That's
Because
how
they
it
had
still is
just
now.
because they had jobs. Yeah, so that's probably how you are now. And
Yeah.
so that was the way it was already in '83.
And I remember in '86 when I came, after Katrina and I got married and started having kids and lived next door, I worked full time in the house, and I don't even remember how much it was, but I got a stipend from my work for the family. So it was still going on then, all the way through '93 when we left. So.
And that was I remember Virginia being a strong support of that. So that we could have a family in the community.
Yeah, yeah.
No, we always just had some people who could really make a little bit of money. Salvation Cause.
Oh, that's
Sure.
right. Yeah, he was
He worked
income.
at
I
a
wish he were
clothing
here.
store. He had a real income.
Yeah.
And even putting her money, she took a stipend for being a doctor, close to went to the Riddle School.
Carolyn and Colleen both have questions.
So this is for early Karen House or early Cass House. What was your practice of praying together? Like, was it a monthly thing, a weekly thing, a daily thing?
Oh, gosh.
And what was your practice of like emotional support for one another? Did you have any organized structure for that? And was there any organized standard of relationship or reconciliation?
Oh, all easy questions.
Woo!
Yeah.
Did you work really hard on that?
All right, we always
Whatever you
did
feel like
prayer
answering
at the
to.
beginning of our meetings, from the at the beginning.
Like one
We had
minute
liturgy.
prayer?
No,
Liturgy at
a
both
couple of
places.
minutes. There were a lot of times when we did the office here in the
Yes.
chapel in the first years. We started out having mass here twice a week, and virtually everyone attended all the time. Then we'd go to
people came
Marco
from the
House for mass.
outside,
Yes,
too.
and people outside, which was a great help. So, and then Cass House had mass.
Wednesday conference would come, and that was my first experience of participating in transubstantiation as a Protestant.
Yeah.
I was very interested in the whole theological stuff that was happening. And some of us met for at particular times of the liturgical year. Some of us would meet in the evenings for prayer, and some of us would meet. It depended on what people wanted. But the emotional support, she's right. We would grab each other and say, "Let's go! I need to get out of here."
Or at Cass House, we would go up to the roof. Well,
that's
right.
right.
When we go up to the roof.
That's right, Tar Beach, absolutely.
Tar Beach.
And sharing at every meeting.
Yeah, and that was important because you could get away. It was the place between the two buildings, and you could get away for like 15, 20 minutes, say, "I'm going to Tar Beach."
And
leave me
nobody
alone."
would-
Nobody
Crawl
would.
through a window, or
No,
was
you
that
climbed up a ladder.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then Dean would climb up and sit. He even got up on that cross one time.
He would come out and
Oh
he'd
my
just
God.
barefoot. He'd run up the steep part of the.
slate
Scare us, yeah, and make the slate fall down sometimes. Anyway, but he never fell. But anyway.
So you were going to say?
Oh, one of the things I remember about finances is whenever we were blessed with a large contribution. If we didn't need it like right away and we knew of another worker house that was in need, we would make a decision and send them money. And I think that's really kind of what the Catholic Worker is about, is that you don't hang on to things that you don't need. And so people were really good about sharing with us. We were, I think, really good about
Except the
sharing
houses
with
are
us.
full of useless things, but that's
Yeah,
different.
right.
That's what you don't need.
Right.
I think, sharing was part of the meetings from the get-go, and always that checking in on how is each person at every meeting was a structured way.
And it probably is, it's not a daily prayer, but we had religious communities that were very generous at giving us retreat space.
Oh, right.
And the arm boosters. So we would go out to MAC, and we had access to getting away, and we would make sure as community we did that. And I think people were pretty faithful about making time for those days.
We'd have an Advent day away, for example.
Yeah, so we would go away and have some prayer, some decision making, and a lot of play, and then we'd come back recharged.
Like how often?
Four times a year, I bet.
Yeah.
Close to it.
But we would have access to go to these places if we needed to sneak away. So if we needed, Janet and I needed to go, for yeah, we could go. Dorothy was very good at her space. Mac, I know, always let us go and
In the very first years, I don't think we were very good about it at all. We had the regular times for prayer and for some sharing, but we never said. I remember when Margaret got murdered. I mean, I don't think I ever talked with anybody about that. I remember standing in the shower just sobbing, but I don't think I talked to anybody about it.
It was not good enough.
Yeah.
It never worked.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit later, we would do this thing called buddies.
Oh, that's right. I forgot
And
that.
you would everyone would pair up with somebody, and it was supposed to be someone that you didn't know real well or weren't real. If you do that now, is that way as well?
We try to do it now.
Oh.
Well, some of us are very good.
Well, it was that way then too.
Yeah.
Some people did it better than others.
Yeah. And you would spend time together once a week, was it? Or how
Or
often?
yeah, or just decide, I guess,
Yeah.
how often. But yeah, that's how I got to know Mark Shute.
I want to nothing about the prayer. There were some years, like I would say, from the 5 years after we opened to maybe 15. There's some years in there where there are a number of us who prayed every night, quietly or in the morning. You go in the chapel and there would really be few people praying silently. And that was at the end of the day or beginning of the day. That went on for a number of years. It was kind of a practice of a number of us to pray half an hour longer a day. And Mark, especially when
Newman.
Newman was a Franciscan, very careful, and you do it. There were a number of us. So that was a good practice. Every Lent, we would do a vigil on Wednesday nights.
Oh, I forgot that.
Overnight.
Yeah.
And everybody would take an hour, we'd do a vigil through the night, every week. And we'd sleep off of the hours, we had the 3 to 4 a.m. but you were in the chapel. And so we did things like that. That really, those things meant quite a lot to me.
Could you ask about reconciliation?
Yeah.
That means members or community members to each other when there was fallings out and things like that?
Yeah, like
Okay.
what was the standard or the practice?
Well, I wish I could say there was a formal process, but I can at least speak to this because I was kicked out of community.
Oh,
Doesn't sound like it's been any reconciliation.
That's actually why we brought you here.
Finally!
This is an intervention, Emmett.
That's okay. But, let the record reflect. I was kicked out formally, but I never moved my stuff. So I don't know what happened in the 48 hours or 72 hours, but something happened that worked from my perspective.
Because you stayed.
So in other words, there were lots of battles, especially at Cass House. I mean, the thing that I don't think I got across about Cass House was that it was so huge that the community had a very different character, and because a premium was put on community members that had organizational skills, had delegation skills, and also a co-equal premium on community members that could be delegated to, worker bees that could just take a task from the more organized type of people and go out and do it. And so there was a lot of stress, a lot of strain. And, we would close the house for a month during the summer, and we would all have a task. And the community got down to about 6 or 7, I think, at one point. And these tasks were huge, And it was like, stripping and waxing all 55,000 square feet. That was your task. And my dad was an accountant, and I knew nothing about fixing up, how to fix things and do things. And I remember I was last to the sign-up list for the summer task one time. And I got the assignment of tuck pointing. In Clement's house, you know what that is. But I literally...
You kept it together till we left. I mean, look.
Well, no. Confession time. I mean, I didn't know what tuck pointing meant, literally. I did not. I had to go ask someone. I signed up for it thinking, tuck pointing, that sounds like some little sort of minor thing that you do. You just sort of kind of tuck it in. Yeah, right. And I got out there, somebody explained to me what it was, and I got out there with my ladder, and I looked up at the facade of Cass House, and it was just, it was hopeless. It was just, you could not do that. I couldn't do it, and so, that summer was a bad tuck pointing summer. And I think Zach took it over next summer, and it was fine. But, there was, but back to the original point, it was, things happened when you had so much responsibility, and it got so organizational that, but in my case, it worked. It came out okay.
I wonder if
go ahead.
people would help me remember a time that I think kind of speaks to what you're asking a little bit, Carolyn. And it was when there were these 2 guys at Cass House. It was one named Dennis.
Steve.
And,
Yeah.
and they kind of brought things to a crisis.
Right.
And so Karen House and Cass, everyone kind of remember how that, I can't remember how exactly that worked. I know that we
We were gone.
It was.
well, I know that you guys were gone.
Well, we were still involved. You might have been gone. I was still involved, but I wasn't living at the house anymore. I think that was it.
I remember it.
Yeah.
Well, and what it was these 2 individuals at Cass House had somehow managed to take over in a way, and became
Because
very
they were worker bees. They were worker bees.
and
So
became
they-
very problematic. And so then these people at Cass House that weren't them came to Karen House and said, "We need help with this."
Yeah.
And so all of us met together and we worked out this process that we used the gospel for. We looked at the gospel. What do you do when you have a problem with somebody? And we kind of paired people up. We decided what we would do, and we'd have pairs of people. I think one from Karen House, one from Cass House. And each pair had a different job. Like the first pair was supposed to go and talk to these people and maybe introduce the problem, and then half a day later, or the second pair would go. And I just wonder if anyone here kind of remembers that.
Tim is the only person I think who was here from that time.
Oh, I was a part of that.
Oh, you were here. I'm sorry.
All I remember was Dennis and Steve developed sort of a different philosophy that I can't describe in any other terms except for maybe it was sort of SD.
Oh,
is that right?
Yes.
And so they just, things would not, if you thought that they should do something, that was your problem. And they could just walk on and do exactly everything that they wanted that particular day, and they didn't feel themselves responsible to other community members.
Okay.
I mean, that could be a horrible mischaracterization, but I know that there was a philosophical thing that just got bigger and bigger with them, where they couldn't function in community anymore.
Well,
the community not function.
They did.
And
we were all tired.
And part of it had to do with accepting guests and what sort of rules would be enforced and whether guests would be allowed to have alcohol or drugs. And it also had to do with money and what was happening with donations that were coming into Cass House and who was opening the mail and who were the signers on the bank account. So, I mean, these were really, it wasn't just a turf argument.
It had a lot to do with money, as I recall, actually, and control of the money coming in and disbursement of it.
And I
wasn't there.
I'm wondering if we can wrap this part of it up, because we're almost out of time, and I know Colleen's been waiting a really long time to ask a question.
Okay. We can talk about this later.
Can I just say one more thing about?
One more thing about that, and then let Colleen speak, and then we keep moving. We're probably going to need to continue this conversation separately.
Okay.
But
Just about the issue of supporting each other and structurally. I mean, one of the things that the Karen House community did, and I think Cass House did as well, but and you probably still do this, was clearness committees. So when there was a crisis, I mean, there were a lot of people with in and out of relationships within the community, and there were issues that had to be negotiated about that, and or people would have discussions, questions about their job outside the house, and whether to change jobs or careers, or I mean, anytime someone had an issue, the structure was that the community would establish a clearness committee, which would meet with this person, and it was a self-selected committee in terms of who you met with, and that person and one or two other community members would talk it through multiple times and help them sort of discern what to do. And I just always felt that was one of the things that we did really well.
And that's a Quaker practice.
I was just going to say.
It comes out of the resource manual.
Yeah, that's
directly out of it.
Yeah. I remember that, Jenny.
Colleen, go.
I'll just ask you.
no, ask.
Girl, we're all waiting. No, I just was curious, like, given living in the house and sort of doing a lot of work outside the house in terms of, resistance work, I can't imagine having an office in the toy room right now, like, how the community would come to that decision. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that, because it seems like there's so much work rooted already in the house, than to make the decision to have the schlep office there too. That's crazy.
We didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought we had extra room because the clothes room, if there was one, was in the basement. And I don't know, the kids were everywhere, I guess. Yeah. We didn't have a specific toy room.
Yeah.
How long did it last? Did it last past that 1 year?
Well, it was probably a year that we were there.
Yeah, it was a year that I was there.
Yeah. And then we decided to. Then we moved it over to St. Nicholas, I think.
Oh, that's right.
I have one more comment about about our community support. I've said this out loud at Loretto a number of times, but I've never said it to the worker. In the 80s, 2 of my brothers died of AIDS, and I was back and forth to New York a good bit, and I came back from a funeral, and Pat asked me how the funeral was. And I started to tell him, and the phone rang, and he got distracted and had to deal with whatever it was. And that was it from the worker in terms of support. And I realized how, even though I wasn't around Loretto all that much, how present and how conscious they were of what I was going through, and wanted to hear and took the time to sit and listen. And it was part of my own growing up and my own understanding. I began to try to encourage people to listen more to guests and to spend more time and to think more. But I think that because we're with people whose needs are so huge and who really have nothing, that it's very easy for us to not be very supportive of one another.
And of the guests, frankly.
Well, and of the guests too, yeah.
And I just want to tag on to that. Earlier I said that I was 25, I guess, when I came down. And that was good in the sense that I didn't know what a risk it was. And the freedom to do that. But it was also a dark period as far as community. And just growing up and figuring out who I was, and and I think it was just really hard, both here and at Cass House.
And maybe harder for you than others too.
Yeah. In the end, if we hadn't been naive and young, it wouldn't have happened. So
Right.
it's all part of the journey.
I think it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't had the passion for it. Right. I mean, the young and the naive, yeah, but
But
Well, a lot of us were young and naive,
Right.
and we didn't have the passion for it.
Right.
And so that, to me, is what I see driving or drove you, your passion and your commitment.
I think that's anything that's a miracle. I mean, I feel like often we don't have to be perfect or ready or whatever for wonderful things to happen. I mean, look what happened during that dark time. It's amazing what you did. We would not be here without you. You know, I mean, really. And I'm just so grateful. And I'm sorry for the hardship of those times.
Yeah, I did feel when we closed Cass and I thought about all how many people had been served and helped.
Can't call it that.
Right. You know.
Don't discount all of the people that came to serve and how that impacted their lives.
All of us.
What I want to say is that, in wrapping up, that just as Dorothy Day said, we're just sitting around talking, and it's still going on. And I'd like to acknowledge the present community because it's still a very vibrant, amazing This is just an amazing place. I know lots of people still have some questions. We can make a consensus decision if you want to go longer. The schedule was going to be noon lunch, and then the round table was going to start at 1. It's now about 5 to noon, I think.
Yes.
So if folks want to still hang around, I know Jerry and Marty both had questions kind of waiting in line. So if you folks want to kind of wrap it up.
Why don't we take their question and then wrap it up?
Okay. And if people maybe need to start doing whatever they can. Okay, Jerry and Marty.
Well, my biggest thing is to say thank you to all of you, old, middle, young community who's been for their. I came in 1980 as a friend, had a grace moment in West Virginia in Sedona.
Sedalia. Sedalia, Colorado.
Sedalia, Colorado. Came to Catholic Worker because of Virginia, and we've never left because we have been just taken in and nurtured so well and so beautifully that I now feel that these workers are our extended family. And I can imagine our life without all the models and the love that you all have shared to each other, with the community, and obviously with all the wonderful guests who've been here for all those 30-something years. And to tell you, you've not only marked our lives, you've marked the lives of our children. So many of our children, Catholic Worker was what they still look at as one of the most important parts of their life. And I just want to say thank you.
And I would say, and while we did it badly the whole time, really,
Not the whole time.
the ways we
Wasn't all
we
bad.
did not take care of each other, did not take care of our guests, did not, but apparently enough, just enough.
We're still all here with each
Yeah,
other.
But
yeah.
but you learned, and we all learned
Exactly.
as we went along, like, oh, this doesn't seem right. I mean, that's how you learn. is
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
being wrong.
All along, the repair of relationships, even though it wasn't perfectly done.
Yeah. Or there was something enough bigger than
There
us
was
to hold us
enough-
together.
Yes, and there was the common purpose that we all
Yeah.
need,
Yeah.
to the commitment to something much bigger than anything any one of us could do. That was enough to knit everybody together.
Jerry, I'm sorry.
I think Marty handled it.
Can I make one suggestion?
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to, if we could take 5 minutes and remember the people that have died.
I would love to.
And just spontaneously mention a name of anybody that you know, or maybe even not here.
We're going to do that for liturgy tonight, but in case anyone is not here for liturgy, let's do it again now too. But just in recognizing them.
Stanley Hackney.
Mark Shu.
Leela, Eleanor Barkey, Margaret, Charles, little Charles.
Hazel Tulak and Ann McGivern.
Don.
Schnitzel, who's not.
Yeah.
Oh,
who's
Don
not
Kress.
Yeah, and John Kavanaugh, who is not here. I think they were just very much part of.
Jim Krings.
Oh yeah, Claire and Joe both.
But these,
Ann and
these are
Bowen.
these deceased.
No, deceased or just absent.
We mixed them up a little.
But Tom Hoyman, who died.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
4 years ago.
What about Zach and Debbie?
Zach and Debbie.
Tom Anchor.
Yes.
Kathy Derby. Marilyn Roberts.
Joanne Silva.
Kathy Barr.
Joy Cunningham.
Sheridan Sonora. Sheridan Sonora.
Yeah.
Mary Dutcher.
Yes. Lee Carter.
Gleason.
Who?
Marianne Gleason.
Oh yes.
Also, all those folks who actually started a Catholic Worker House back in
Ann
the
and
late
Poland.
20s or the early
Yes.
30s.
One of the
Cyril
people.
Eckel.
One of the
Yeah.
people involved was Walter Kramer, and he just his memorial services this morning.
Ann and Boland.
Yeah. Pop Spray.
Pop
Spray.
Yeah.
He was a trooper that first summer.
Franklin Claire Lake.
Thanks to all of those who traveled.
Yes.
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 To be with us,
Lovely.
Pat and Karen, Jim and Katrina,
Janet.
Courtney, Janet.
Liz. Your sister here.
What do you call your dad? Arnold.
Bill, absolutely.
Oh, Harriet Baggett.
Harriet.
Dolores.
Harriet. How
Dolores.
can we forget Harriet?
Dennis Kennedy.
Dennis Kennedy. Tom Nelson.
Tom Nelson.
Nelson.
Oh my God. Bob Gettinger.
Yes.
Jim Crane, of course. Bill Hodell.
Jim Crane. Bill Hodell. I've forgotten him.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. I was back and forth, and I was just, I thought, no, I really want to be there because I was going to get
Part of the fun for me.